All right, we are looking now at this text in 1 Samuel chapter 20. We've covered a little bit of that. We didn't get to cover much of it last week, and we had to close out our class time. So if your Bible is open to 1 Samuel chapter 20, let's just begin taking a look at that from verse 1 and read a few of those verses together. Then David fled from Naioth in Ramah and came and said to Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my iniquity?" So David determined Saul is out to kill him, to extinguish his life. And he's asking Jonathan, the son of King Saul, "Well, what in the world have I done? What have I done wrong? And that your father is out to kill me." And Jonathan tells him, "It's not that way at all." So verse 2, he said, "Far from it. You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. So why should my father hide this thing from me? It's not so." And he's telling David, "I haven't heard a peep about this. My father tells me everything he's going to do, and if he was going to do something like this to try to kill you again, because he tried that before." And Jonathan talked his father out of it, reminded him of the facts, and persuaded him not to kill David, and he said he wouldn't do it. And now David says he's going to do it again. Jonathan says, "I haven't heard anything about it. He tells me everything." And David tells him, no, it's not that way. David vowed, verse 3 again, saying, "Your father knows well that I found favor in your sight." And he said, don't let Jonathan know this, or he'll be grieved. And so David says to Jonathan, "Your dad's just not telling you about this stuff anymore, because we're friends, and he knows it. And he doesn't want you to be filled with grief and sorrow, so he's just not talking to you." And remember, Jonathan talked his dad out of it before. So David said, "He's just not telling you, and it is this way." So they're going to concoct a plan. Jonathan tells him, verse 4, "Whatever you say, I'll do for you." What do you need to be comforted in this, to know whether my father seeks your life or not? Whatever you tell me to do, I'll help you with it. I'll do it. And so they work out a plan. By the way, David gave this great line in verse 3 that there's hardly a step between me and death. I've looked at that over and over, and I thought, man, that's really a powerful statement about really, generally, how close we all are to our last breath. You just never know. But David said his threat is this real. There's hardly a step between me and death. So they work out a plan now. And in verse 5, David said to Jonathan, "Behold, tomorrow's the new moon, and I ought to sit down and eat with the king." That's what they did at the new moon. They had a feast. And David would be expected to be there at the table with King Saul. And he said, "But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field until the third evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, well, David's earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, because it's the yearly sacrifice there for the whole family." And if he says, "Well, it's good, your servant will be safe. But if he's very angry, know that he's decided on evil. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you." I find that most important. They have come into a covenant, an agreement as friends, but with the Lord. That's the best kind. That's where it really matters. When you form a friendship with someone and it's between you and them with the Lord in the middle of it. Now, that's a friendship you can count on. Someone who cares about your soul more than anything else. So that's the kind of friendship you want to seek out in life, where you make a friendship and an agreement with somebody, but it's based on both of you having a relationship with God in truth. And so that's the kind of covenant they've made between each other. And Jonathan tells him, rest of verse 8, "If there's iniquity," or David tells him, "if there's iniquity in me, put me to death yourself. Why bring me to your father? If you find out there's sin in me, David said, if there's some evil in me, Jonathan, you put me to death. Why bring me to your father to do it? And Jonathan said, Far be it from you. For if I should indeed learn that evil has been decided by my father to come upon you, then would I not tell you about it? And David said to Jonathan, Well, who's going to tell me if your father answers harshly? And Jonathan said to David, transition verse, Come on, let's go out into the field. We'll talk about how we're going to pass this message, how we're going to communicate after this. So that's kind of the text that we were in last week, and we had to close. And there's a mention there in verse 8 of a previous covenant that those men had. And that started right after David killed Goliath. That was in chapter 18. That's when their covenant as friends in God first started. And we're seeing this covenant growing and expanding. And as time goes on and different events come into their lives, that covenant they made in chapter 18 after the death of Goliath, that covenant is growing and expanding and enlarging to encompass other things. And this is one of those moments where that covenant's just growing a little bit because of the current circumstance, but it still remains the same in its foundation. It's all about God. And Jonathan's recognizing David is the one who's going to take the throne after Saul. God's with David in that, and Jonathan's going to help him. He's going to support him in that. And the way this begins to unfold is very interesting and informative about their dedication to God above all else. So they're going to pass this information, and they go out into the field to sort of get the lay of the land and talk about where David can be, where nobody else can see him, and how Jonathan's going to approach this whole thing. So here we are now in chapter 20, verse 12. What comments do you have before we get to that reading? That's new reading for us. All right, beginning in verse 12, Then Jonathan said to David, The Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I've sounded out my father, when I felt this thing out, we're going to come to this table at the new moon, and when I talk to my dad and he says something to me, when I sound out my father about this time tomorrow or the third day, behold, if there's good feeling toward David, shall I not then send to you and make it known to you? If it please my father to do you harm, may the Lord do so to Jonathan more also if I do not make it known to you and send you away that you may go in safety. And may the Lord be with you as He has been with my father. If I'm still alive, what's Jonathan just said to him? What does Jonathan understand about what's about to take place? My father might kill me. If he finds this out, if he discovers what's going on, he might kill me. How would you like to have a dad like that? That is contradicting God, opposed to God, goes off on wild tangents, is, every once in a while in the house he just goes nuts and is physically abusive, verbally abusive, to the point that I think he might kill me. And Jonathan's a grown man. He is a soldier in his own right. He has armor. He has a sword. He has a shield. And so here's a grown man. He's afraid of what his dad might do to him. So this is a horrible relationship to be in. But I want you to notice as we finish out 1 Samuel, it's going to take a while to do that, I understand, but I want you to see how Jonathan walks a line between loving his dad, loyalty to his dad, but God comes first. Therefore, David, because he's on the side of God, comes before his own father. And he walks this line between his father and David, with God holding the scales, and how he does that. And maybe that's going to help us, because we have those things come up all the time with family, don't we? Family's chosen something against God, but I want to stand with God here's God's people, here's my family, and how do I walk that line in between there? Jonathan is doing that. And so watch all of that unfold, and it may give us some help, sort of let the Bible be a counselor in those kinds of things. Linda? What about Saul at this? What about Saul? Is he losing his mind? Yeah, he goes nuts. He doesn't think straight. He doesn't act straight. He just goes off on these tangents. God's not with him. This evil spirit comes upon him from the Lord, and that evil spirit he's chosen against God. And when you choose against God, then God's no longer supporting, no longer helping, no longer on your side. He hasn't got Samuel as his counselor from God. It's like going through life without the Bible. And you're just trying to make your own way. And you can see some people today who don't believe in God and don't want to hear what you have to say. And if you bring up God to them, you bring up Bible to them, watch them go nuts on you. And that's the way Saul's behaving. And he goes into these raging moments here and there. So in a sense, yeah, he's kind of losing his mind over all of this and his behavior. And so it's really awful to see. You can imagine being a family member and seeing someone you love in your family behaving that way, thinking that way, irrational. And that's torturous for Jonathan to have to watch that. So it's very, very difficult. All right, so here he said, you know, if I'm still alive, verse 14, if we do this, and if I live through it, will you not show me the loving kindness of the Lord, that I may not die? You shall not cut off your loving kindness from my house forever. This is Jonathan talking to David. Jonathan was meant to be heir to the throne. But now he's saying, I know that's coming to an end. And if I die in the process of this, would you please watch out for my family? Would you please take care of them? When the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord require it at the hands of David's enemies. Jonathan made David vow again because of his love for him, because he loved him as he loved his own life. So the covenant is spoken and renewed again because of their great love for one another. Jonathan's not backing away from that promise in God. He's not backing away from it at all, but he's asking for it to be renewed and stronger than ever because he really loved David, because David loved the Lord, and the Lord loved and supported David. And so their friendship was the kind that just isn't going to be broken. So he agrees to testing out his father's intent. And then he's going to tell David about it. And so this covenant now grows to include the family, the descendants of Jonathan. Should Jonathan die in the process of all of this, that David's going to watch out not only for Jonathan, but for the descendants, the family of Jonathan. So Jonathan's really looking down the road of time. That's hard for us sometimes. We tend to get the blinders on and look at today, the current circumstance. Where am I at right now? What do I need today? Jonathan's looking down the road of time. When he's removed from the picture, when he's dead and gone, what's going to come of my children and grandchildren? What's going to happen to them? And he's looking down the road that way, far, far from his own moment. And he's considering that, preparing for it, and providing for it. He knows that he could lose his life in this. Later in chapter 20, verse 33, his father actually throws a spear at Jonathan, tried to kill him. And so he foresees the end of his father's reign. He sees that he's not going to be elevated to the throne. And he knows that God's going to cut off all the enemies of David. God's going to take care of David. And so he knows that's also going to include his father at one time. Now, what descendant of Jonathan is going to come into view later? We're going to be introduced to him in 2 Samuel chapter 4. Who is it that David takes care of later? Mephibosheth. Who is Mephibosheth? Who? Who is he? Jonathan's son. And he's lame, can't walk. How did he get to be lame? Butterfinger's nurse. When Jonathan is killed on Mount Gilboa with his dad in battle with the Philistines, the nurse scoops up this boy. She scoops him up and wants to flee to safety with him to protect his life because she's thinking he's going to get executed next. That reign of Saul's come to an end on Mount Gilboa, but here's a descendant to the throne, and she figures he's next, and so she scoops up this little one, and as she does, and she goes to flee and run, she drops him. Well, he ends up being lame. And when we get introduced to him as a young man later in 2 Samuel chapter 4, this covenant that Jonathan made with David comes into play. And so it's really neat to see how all of that works out. This is an application point that I've made from time to time, year to year, and I want us to think about again. Can you look down the road of time from this moment? For younger ones, can you see your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren? And can you look down the road of time and think about the best way to protect and provide for them should you be removed from their life? If your life comes to an end, if you or they move to opposite ends of the country or around the world somewhere, how do you protect and provide for them? I want you to think about what Jonathan is doing with David. Here is the way to do it. One, you understand the ultimate will of God. You understand the justice of the Lord. And then you connect your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. You connect them to the faithful. Who's that? That's the church. It begins with the local congregation. And you teach your children their connection to God is not just you. It is the Lord's people. It is the local congregation. It is the Lord's people wherever you move, wherever you go. When I'm dead, when my life is over, when we move far away, your connection to God is not just through me, but through the faithful ones of God. Now you put their hand there, and you make God the most important of all of that. God is supreme in all of that. And you seek out the faithful because God blesses the faithful ones. He helps them. So you connect them to the faithful who are connected to God, connect them to God through God's provision of His New Testament church. And then when you're out of the picture, they still have guidance in life and help in life, and they're going the right direction. When parents make the connection to God just through them and remove their children from the local congregation, then when the parent's out of the picture, the children don't know which way to turn. When they grow up, when they become young adults, when they have children of their own, they don't know how to connect to God anymore. And they may go here or there or somewhere else into denominationalism because they haven't learned about connecting to God through His faithful ones. And they move from here to there to that place, and they're far away from home, and they lose that connection. And it doesn't really matter to them how they connect to God. if it's a feeling, if it's an emotion, if it's man-made religion, if it's I'll just do it by going out in the wilderness somewhere and looking at nature, they don't know how to think about it because they haven't been connected the way God designed it to be. So Jonathan is connecting his descendants to God. And David is with God, and God is with David, and so he connects through David. Watch out for my family, because that's where God's going to be, is with David. And that's how the throne is going to develop. So they make this vow, they renew this vow, this covenant again, and now they come up with a plan. Here's how we're going to pass information to one another when we figure out what's going on with my dad. Now, before we get to verse 18, you have comments here, other thoughts? Okay. I almost hate to leave this point I just made, so I'm going to make one more comment about it. I've made this kind of statement based on these kinds of passages in the Bible. I've made that statement before. And talk about the importance of being a part of the local congregation, assembly with those people, Bible class, getting involved, integrated into that, part of it, involved and active. And had a dad take his family home, sit his children down, and talk about how the preacher was all wrong, didn't know what he was talking about, that's error, that's not the way it's supposed to be. Those children have grown up. Most of them are not faithful to God and His people this day. Some of those caught up in denominationalism. It's not because I say so. Read your Bible and look at God's eternal design for those that He would save in His Son. Look at the eternal design. You get to the book of Ephesians, and the church is in the eternal purpose of God for the saved. And to make that something unimportant, to diminish it, is devastating to children and grandchildren and those who will come after them. So here is this great connection we should learn about. Now, verse 18. Jonathan said to him, to David, "Tomorrow's the new moon. You'll be missed because your seat will be empty. When you stayed for 3 days, you shall go down quickly and come to the place where you hid yourself on that eventful day. And you shall remain by the stone Ezel." Some of you have a reference to a mound. There was a certain place on the horizon landscape that you could spot, and it'd be a focal point. They both knew where it was. And as all this began and you hid yourself in the beginning, go back to that spot, to this mound, to this place called Ezel, and I'll come out there. I'm going to shoot 3 arrows to the side as though I shot at a target. And behold, I'll send the lad saying, "Go find the arrows." If I specifically say to the lad, "Behold, the arrows are on this side of you, get them," then come, for their safety for you and no harm, as the Lord lives. But if I say to the youth, "Behold, the arrows are beyond you," not to the side, but they're further, they're beyond you. If I say that, go, for the Lord has sent you away. As for the agreement of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. So they have a meeting place. And now they have a signal about how they're going to pass the information. And so now we come to the banquet. We begin in verse 24. So David hid in the field. And when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat as usual, the seat by the wall. I had to think about that. How many of you are like me? If you go into a big restaurant, big open place, do you like to sit with your back to the wall? I always prefer that. I don't like sitting out in the open with all, who's behind me, who's coming around. I love to sit with my back to the wall. I wouldn't mind going sitting in the corner of that room just so I could see everything that's going on around me. And Gwen and I, when we go into a restaurant, she's learned a couple things about me. One, I don't like to sit so that my eyes are looking at a sunshiny window because I get a headache. Two, I don't like to sit so the majority of that place is behind me. And so I thought it was interesting at this banquet, he had his seat by the wall. He's pretty paranoid anyway at this point. So then Jonathan rose up and Abner sat down by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul did not speak anything that day, for he thought, it's an accident. He's not clean. Surely he's not clean. Ceremonially, there must be something going on where he can't come to the table. It came about the next day, the second day of the new moon, David's place was empty. Saul said to Jonathan, his son, why has the son of Jesse not come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Jonathan then answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. By the way, I understand their plan. I get the plan that David and Jonathan have made, but I do have this problem with it. What's the problem I have with it? It's built on some dishonesty. There's some deceit going on. We're going to say you went to Bethlehem. He didn't go to Bethlehem. It wasn't what they pretended it to be. So even mixed in with those who are faithful to God, you find some deceit mixed in there here and there, some what I would call stumbles of faith along the way. Basically faithful to God, but they're making some mistakes with telling some deceitful things to get away with some stuff. And so I have a problem with that. And I'm glad you saw that and that you have a problem with it, because it shouldn't be that way. So he asked, where is he? And Jonathan said, well, he's going to Bethlehem. He said, please let me go, since our family has a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to attend. And now, if I found favor in your sight, please let me get away, that I may see my brothers. For this reason he's not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger burned against Jonathan. And he said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you're choosing the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Therefore now send and bring him to me, for he must surely die. But Jonathan answered Saul his father and said to him, why should he be put to death? What has he done? Then Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him down. So Jonathan knew that his father had decided to put David to death. Then Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger and did not eat food on the second day of the new moon, for he was grieved over David because his father had dishonored him. So Saul's first thought, well, David must be ceremonially unclean. Second day doesn't go so well. And he detects the lie of Jonathan. He figures that out. How did Saul try to spin the purpose of all of this to Jonathan? How did he try to spin it? He tried to portray that, Jonathan, this isn't about me. Who's it about? Jonathan, this is for your sake. As long as the son of Jesse lives, your kingdom and your throne and that of your descendants will never be established. Jonathan, I'm watching out for you. This is all for you. That's sort of reminiscent of the Garden of Eden and what the serpent did. Spinning that around, so that it's not what it really is. And then I want you to notice this. Saul expects that Jonathan knows exactly where David is. Go get him and bring him here. He's got to die. He said, I know you know where he's at. Go get him. I've got to put him to death. And then, what about that insult to Jonathan's mother? What about that? Well, surely you can't be any son of mine. I mean, no son of mine would betray me like this. So I'm saying somebody else is your dad. That's, reading that, that's sort of the way that comes across to me. I might be wrong about that, but that's the way it comes across, that now he's attacking Jonathan's mother. That you can't be a son of mine and betray me like this. And so now he's throwing these crazy insults out, and then he tries to kill Jonathan, and Jonathan is hot. He gets up from the table, and the wording in the New American Standard Update is fierce anger. And that wording, the Hebrew wording there, has to do with the flaring of the nostrils. Jonathan is hot as hot can be when he gets up from the table, and he doesn't come back to it. The next day, he's not there. He won't come to table with his dad anymore. And he's dishonored David with all of this. Dishonored Jonathan. Dishonored his mother. He's just hot, angry over all of this. So now comes the meeting in the field. Here we go. Verse 35. Do you have comments or questions before we move to this next section? We're right toward the end of the chapter. All right, let's start. Yes. Okay, did he know that David was going to take the throne? Had it been explicitly said to him? And the answer is, I don't think that he knows explicitly, but he's able to put two and two together. He's been told, you're going to be off the throne, your descendants are going to be off the throne, the Lord's going to pick somebody who's better than you, and a man after God's own heart. David comes on the scene, kills Goliath. People are singing his praises over King Saul. Everywhere he goes, there's great success. He does know that God is with David, and his son Jonathan has turned against him toward David. His daughter Michal has turned against him toward David. He's able to put two and two together. Someone's coming up, and everything points to David, whether it's been explicitly told to him or not. He's able to piece it together, and he knows David's the guy. And so he's out to get him. You can watch it with politics today. Uh-oh, here it comes. 2024, it's coming on us fast now. You don't know who the next president's going to be, but the opposition can figure out the best candidate that's going to do it. And they will begin to go on the attack. And Saul can certainly piece two and two together. This is the best candidate, and it is the only candidate to take this throne. And so he's got it figured out, and he knows when he makes this statement, he's saying he knows it, whether it's been explicitly told or not. Yes? Yes. Are you talking about chapter 18? What verse are you at? 10. Evil spirit from God, evil spirit from God came mightily upon Saul. He raved. What translation are you in? New Century, all right? Mine has the word raved. And what we discover in that is that word raved, New American Standard Update, prophesied, New Century Translation, and what were you in, Sherry? King James, New King James? And so you have in some translations raved, and many others prophesied. The word, the Hebrew word, is the same. And it can mean raved, and it's the same word that is used of the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel when they were calling on Baal all day to take up their sacrifice. Same word. Well, they weren't prophesying in the sense of speaking forth God's truth. They were communicating, they thought, to Baal. And so that word rave can be talking out of your head from your own subjective thinking and being. And I take it in chapter 18, verse 10, that's what's going on there. Now later, when he comes with his assassins to Ramah to capture David, every group, 3 of them that he sent to Samuel at Ramah, they all began to prophesy, same word. And then when Saul showed up, he began to prophesy with the prophets, and I would understand that to be the truth. So in one sense, he's raving, which leads him to throwing a spear. In another one, he's caused to prophesy, in other words, to humble himself before God. No matter what he thinks, he has to tell forth God's truth. It's hard to know. It could be that he's raving or prophesying in chapter 18, verse 10, of some other sort, maybe of truth, and who knows what he's acknowledging in that. But certainly when he comes to Ramah and he's prophesying with the prophets of God that he would be speaking forth truth, question, was it at a point like that that God was revealing to him the truth about David? We don't know. We don't know. But he can certainly piece it together as to what's going on there. And now he wants to get rid of David, and he figures his throne's going to be secure. So explicit, or if it's this thinking deduction process, he's got it figured out. And so that's where he's at now. So they go out to the field, and it's in the morning. Was that the first buzzer I heard? Okay. They go out in the morning. Jonathan's in the field. He's appointed this place with David. David's in hiding. Nobody else knows he's there. He's got a little lad with him, verse 35. He said to the lad, "Run now, find the arrows which I am about to shoot." If I was a little lad, I'd say, "Can you please shoot the arrows first and then I'll go after them?" If you've been around bow and arrow, you know you don't run out on that side of the arrows before they're shot. And so he said, "Go on out there a ways, and I'll shoot the arrows." And he shot them past him. Then the lad reached the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot. And Jonathan called after the lad and said, "Is not the arrow beyond you?" And Jonathan called after the lad, "Hurry, be quick, do not stay." Who's he talking to? David. "Hurry, be quick, do not stay." And the lad thinks it's only him and Jonathan out there, and he's talking to the boy. "Hurry up." But he's talking to Jonathan code language. Get out of here as fast as you can. And Jonathan's lad picked up the arrow, came to his master. The lad was not aware of anything. Only Jonathan and David knew about the matter. Then Jonathan gave his weapons to the lad and said to him, "Go bring them to the city." When the lad was gone, David arose from the south side and fell on his face to the ground, bowed 3 times, and they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the more. Jonathan said to David, "Go in safety, inasmuch as we have sworn to each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord will be between me and you, and between my descendants and your descendants forever." And he arose and departed while Jonathan went into the city. Second buzzer. We have so much to say about these final verses. Things that are misunderstood, twisted, and distorted to evil in our culture today. and things between these two men that we need to explore and talk about, and some applications for us as well. So we'll come back next week. I'll be in Tennessee. Gwen and I will be over there, the other side of Knoxville, at Polishing the Pulpit lectureship. We're looking forward to that. Thank you for affording for us to go, making a way for us to get there. We do look forward to that. It's so refreshing. And we'll come back with a lot of good things. So next week will be somebody else in class here. And the week after we'll be back, Lord willing, and we'll continue this. We are dismissed. Thank you.